This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you.
All right. Let's see how many people I can piss off this week. Shouldn't be that hard, because not that this is all that shocking to any of you that have two brain cells to rub together, but Dynamite sucked for the most part, with one notable exception that we will get into during the review. And it ultimately saved it from ranking among the worst episodes of Dynamite I've seen all year. Aside from that one thing, a horribly wretched television program that show was. For 1 hour and 30-something minutes, that was by far, hands down, one of the single worst television programs I've seen in the entirety of 2022. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have watched this show for a while and you have listened to me cover Dynamite every single week, think about the ground that covers. I have been on record talking about how god-awfully horrendous that show has been since the fallout to Double or Nothing in May, and particularly over the last month or so. It's hard to describe how bad these shows have been, other than just flat out saying it's almost as if Tony Khan has been actively trying to make this the worst wrestling show of all time. Every single good possible thing that they've crafted since May of this year, anytime they had something in the palm of their hand that they could have actually made work or drew money with, they've gutted it. And let me just run down a few of those bullet points in case you think I'm trying to blow smoke up your ass right now. Trust me, I've got the facts to back it up. MJF, now gone from the television program and hasn't been remotely involved in anything on the show, despite having hands down these two single best programs in AEW all year, that being the CM Punk feud and the Wardlow feud. Speaking of the devil, Wardlow had all that momentum in the world coming off that pay-per-view match with MJF. Also, they could squander his push, feud him with a pack of untrained security guards and Mark Sterling. Also, they could turn around, realizing that they fucked up with him, and have only recently decided to put the TNT title on him, which they should have done months ago when the dude was white hot, and now we barely see him most weeks on television. FTR, two of the hottest guys in the company right now, coming off their series of matches with the Briscoes, the best damn tag team in that company, hands down. The people are behind them. They want to see them on TV every single week, kicking butt and winning matches. So, of course, what does Tony do? Well, he actively keeps them off of television most weeks. And because the Beta Bucks are sour pussies that can't get over the fact that FTR are more over than they are, the one major money feud that they could actually sell on pay-per-view to draw tickets and get people to pay to see it happen, well, of course they don't do it, because that would mean that the Bucks would have to put over FTR clean and solidify Cash and Dax as the best tag team in the business. And now the Bucks are baby faces going after another set of belts, completely disengaged from FTR altogether, and now they're back to doing their dorky club act with their play friends. Do you want me to keep going? Okay, I will. The Jungle Boy Christian feud. Totally wasted potential after they butchered the Jungle Boy return and turned the dinosaur babyface after 2.5 weeks of being a heel. Bryan Danielson got a concussion at the Double or Nothing pay-per-view after participating in a Falls Count Anywhere garbage fest, sat the show out for 2 months, Also, he could come back to his return match and do a job to Daniel Garcia, who's never going to draw a dime in the business no matter how much Tony Khan rams that moron down our throat every week. And most recently, we had the completely random Team Taz split that happened for no discernible reason, despite the fact that Hobbs and Starks were actually over as a tag team and the people wanted to see them win the belts in the first place. So, of course, Tony deliberately didn't put the belts on him. Also, he could break them up a few weeks later, and now they're going to be feuding with each other and probably get lost in the shuffle along with everyone else on the show after the fact. It's beyond amazement to me. It's seriously as if Tony is doing it on purpose. I can think of no other reason as to why Tony is screwing up every possible good thing that falls into his lap other than to spite me. Because God forbid I criticize all the other lame shit that he books on that television show every week. Because God forbid I happen to not enjoy all the car crash bullshit and the insufferable outlaw schmucks he rams up my arse in a given week. But then you give me something I can sink my teeth into, and right when I'm about to get on board with it, pull the rug out right from under it. That's why it's virtually impossible for me to get invested in anything on this show. But, with that said, there was one thing that saved this show from eternal damnation this week. Like I said, it took until the last 3 minutes of the show to get there, but boy was it worth it in the end just to see that reaction and watch it transpire on TV. And we'll get to it. But first, gotta pull a Ben Shapiro here and get some plugs out of the way. No sponsors or anything, but I do want to encourage you to subscribe to the FSWR channel, like the show, leave a comment, and make sure you stop back every single Monday and Friday for new content here on YouTube and Rumble. We deal out the classic and the modern wrestling talk here. So if you like old school wrestling, definitely come back each week to check the show out. Today's retro review series covers NWA World Championship Wrestling from 1986 and World Class Championship Wrestling from 1983. And on Mondays, we've got the classic retro Raw reviews from 1993. And we're single-handedly working our way through the libraries from there, so it is all consistent. However, as always, we usually kickstart the Friday program with the Dynamite Report. And, you know what? I've never done this before, but since the only good thing about this show was what happened in the final segment, I'm going to cover that first and touch on it before we put the rest of the show to pasture. The main event was Chris Jericho and Jon Moxley for the AEW World Championship, and I decided to try something here. An experiment, if you will. I've said it before, but in case you're a new viewer happening to be watching the show for the first time, I hate Jon Moxley's matches. I hate the ring style. I hate the way he works and conducts himself. I hate the excessive use of blood for no reason. I just hate it. There's no other way of sugarcoating it. I think he sucks. It's not the kind of wrestling I enjoy, so under normal circumstances, I would have probably opted to either skip large chunks of this match or pay less attention to it, knowing that I was going to be able to predict just about every spot he would do, because it's all the same, let's be honest. However, backing up to something that happened earlier in the program, there was a backstage promo that Jericho did that really caught my attention. He was dressed in the Lionheart gear, obviously dating back to his late 90s run in WCW, New Japan, and ECW. But what drew my attention was the delivery of the promo. Because for the first time in God knows how fucking long, with all the sports entertainment crap Jericho's been involved with on this show nonstop in the last 2 years, this sounded like an old school Jericho promo. This was a serious button-down Chris Jericho promo that I don't think I've heard since the early days of AEW when the guy was actually trying to be a star and act like a main eventer. And we can break down the logistics of whether or not it was authentic or whatever, because, Jericho flip-flops between gimmicks more times than the Big Show has turned face and heel throughout his career. At the end of the day, I'm not going to get hung up on it. I jumped off the Jericho bandwagon a long time ago, and I was already skeptical that he was going to be able to do anything to get me back on board with him after the show, regardless of what they did in this match. However, the promo delivery from Jericho, after it was over, the first thing I thought was, okay. So he seems to be taking this rather professionally. He wasn't cracking inane jokes. He wasn't playing the thing up for laughs. He wasn't being an over-the-top cartoon character. He was being Chris Jericho. And watching the evolution of Jericho's career over the years, the ups and downs of what he's been involved with in any promotion, the best Chris Jericho I've ever seen is when he's just being Chris Jericho. And while some people might interpret that as him being bland or vanilla, I interpret it as him being a serious professional wrestler. And with AEW, they could really use a handful of those guys right about now, especially in the main event picture. He already had an uphill battle going in there against the Jiffy Lube attendant, but I promised myself that I was going to watch this match in full, no notes, no distractions. Just close the laptop computer, watch the thing unfold, and watch it, judge it based on what panned out in execution. And by the end, here's what I'll say. Once again, all fairness and impartiality. This was not only the best Chris Jericho match I've seen in God knows how long, but it is probably the best Jon Moxley match I've seen in AEW, period. Yes, there was blood. Yes, there were a lot of things that happened in the match that I wasn't all that fond of. And yes, they totally fucked up the big angle at the end. But as a match, I did not hate this to the extent that I thought I would. Despite how I may feel about the way these guys have been booked and the crap sandwiches they've been involved with for a long time, this actually came off like a main event fight. They didn't do a million pointless dives. They didn't do the voluntary chop exchanges. There was no excessive biting into open lacerations. They wrestled. They had a fight. It was serious. And again, while I didn't love everything that happened here, it was the best performance out of either guy I've seen in a long time. In the case of Moxley, probably forever. The spot with Jericho ripping out Moxley's earring. I mean, on the one hand, there's a part of me that wants to believe that was gimmicked, but because it's Moxley, I also wouldn't be that surprised to hear that it was a shoot spot. I mean, he was definitely bleeding from the earlobe, and I don't know how well you can work a blade job like that, so they probably did that spot for real, which, in that case, stupid, but whatever. But even with the blood, they worked submission holds. For once we had a fucking wrestling match on the show with a clear-cut face and a clear-cut heel that everyone got behind. I'll get this out of the way too, another stupid spot. Chris Jericho locked in the walls on Moxley at one point, which you would think would be one of those climactic points in the match where you're supposed to be at the edge of your seats, begging and pleading for Moxley to grab the ropes for the break, milking it and staying on it for as long as possible so we can all get invested in the pain and the agony that Moxley's going through in that devastating hold. Well, of course it's AEW, so they pitch it to break mid-hold. Well done, guys. Just take the piss out of it entirely, why don't you? So we come back. Moxley's still in the hold, which at that point, all believability and suspense goes out the window because were supposed to buy that Moxley sat in this hold for an entire 2-minute time span and did not pass out from the pain. You know, especially coming from a guy like Chris Jericho, who's supposed to be a master of the walls. And they did some more stuff for a while. It's going along relatively fine for a Moxley match. And then came the spot. And you all know what I'm talking about. So first off, Jericho starts pulling off the turnbuckle pad in front of Aubrey, which is by far the stupidest distraction tactic in the book because A, why would the referee give a shit? And B, if the ref is just going to end up seeing someone blatantly going into an exposed turnbuckle less than 5 minutes later, why would you not just call for the bell and throw the match out? But this was particularly stupid because Jericho throws the turnbuckle pad out to the floor so Aubrey can go chase after it. Like a dog chasing after a chew toy in the backyard. Go get it, girl. And, well, you see, this spot was done so that Sammy Guevara could pass Chris Jericho the baseball bat from the front row of the crowd. Yes, not slide it into the ring so that Aubrey could not see him, but trying to heave it at Chris Jericho from about 15 feet away from the ring, which Aubrey could clearly have a better line of sight to see the bat being thrown, because instead of it being surreptitiously passed under the ring, instead the object is being flailed into the air where everyone can fucking see it, up to and including God himself. And lo and behold, this completely contrived spot went exactly how you figured it would. Guevara overshot his target. The bat proceeded to fly over Jericho's head out to the floor, which meant that Jericho had to run out of the ring, retrieve the bat, get back into the ring, where Aubrey was now standing, and then Aubrey had to pretend like she couldn't see Jericho running at Mox with the bat when she was less than 5 feet away. You know, there's something called an audible in wrestling, guys. It's live TV. Something goes wrong. It doesn't always go according to plan. So, improvise. Jesus Christ, how many years has Jericho been in the business and he still hasn't figured this shit out? So after the bat shot, that was where Mox ended up getting rammed into the exposed buckle, again, right in front of Aubrey, who did not call for the DQ, despite the fact that she clearly saw Jericho ripping off the turnbuckle pad 2 minutes prior. And Jericho followed that up with the Judas effect for a near fall. So that was the first time, I believe, that anyone has ever kicked out of the Judas effect in AEW, which is something that I actually took note of. So you can all stop giving me shit for not remembering all of AEW's complicated insider stories. So finally, Jericho goes for one more bat shot, but he ends up posting himself, and I believe inadvertently getting juice, because when Mox had him in the rear naked choke, Jericho's forehead was gushing blood. Looked like Ric Flair out there. But that actually built to a really good finish spot with Jericho fighting in the hold for about a minute before tapping out. So fortuitous juice actually added to the match rather than detracting from it. It's just a shame AEW has blood on its show every single week, otherwise it might have had an even greater effect. But with that all said, we had the closing moments of the show. And yes, it did involve a completely unprovoked post-match brawl. And yes, we see it every goddamn week, including in the opening match of this very show, which, boy, we'll get to that colossal piece of trash eventually. But this one at least had a good payoff. So you got the JAS goons out there, the Blackpool Combat Club is out there, minus Danielson. They're brawling, they're fighting in the ring, it's all pandemonium, and Jericho is about to hit Mox over the head with the world title, when who should make his return but CM Punk. And I'm normally opposed to the whole WWE approach of let's hit the guy's theme music for the run-in save. Obviously, this is going to get a giant pop. And it didn't disappoint. And you got Punk running down to the ring, disposing of all the heels. He cleans house in a matter of seconds, sends the heels packing, and it made for a great TV moment. Shaking off his foot, letting everyone know, I'm good to go. And afterwards, you get the stare down with him and Mox, which, eventually leads to Mox flipping him the bird and walking off with his crew. I like how the heels just left at that point and decided not to run back out and beat up the Blackpool guys on the ramp, but whatever. It's just a nitpick. And I'll say this, above all else, discount all the things that I could possibly criticize about the overall structure of the segment. Let's just focus on the positives here. CM Punk has been greatly missed. The show sucked without him. It's been greatly missing in star power, especially in that main event title picture. And while I know the Punk injury was untimely and really fucked up with whatever plans AEW had coming off that Forbidden Door pay-per-view, we can look past it now. He's back, and even if he hasn't been medically cleared to wrestle yet, just having Punk back on the show in some capacity to do promos and be a presence in some form or fashion, it's going to make the show a lot better. Am I excited about seeing him and Moxley feud? It's not the program I would have booked, but if it's so we can get the world title back on Punk where it belongs and they tell Mox to go pound sand, I'm all for it. I can deal with a few weeks of TV build for a Punk-Moxley match if the end goal is to put over Punk and get the belt back on him and focus on him as the top champion. Whatever happens after the fact is yet to be determined, but God, was this a necessary move. So when I look back at things, while I still largely thought the show was a dumpster fire for the most part, the last few minutes of the show made up for it. Doesn't mean that I would chalk this up as a good episode of Dynamite, but I wasn't angry after it was over. In fact, I was cautiously optimistic. And then we had the rest of the show, which did not leave me cautiously optimistic. God all fucking mighty, where to even begin with this thing? Well, since we're all out of sorts with talking about the main event segment first, I thought about working my way backwards up to the opener, but since I'm already kind of on a roll here, and we already passingly joked about how appalling that whole thing was, let's just get it out of the way now. It was Darby Allin and Brody King in a casket match, and it was exactly what you envisioned in your head. Stupid. And it had a jump start, which is always glorious, especially when it's the babyface jumping the heel from behind like a coward. It took approximately 1 minute before Darby hit Brody King with a gimmick thumbtack skateboard before he got busted open, because God forbid the show goes 1 week without having to resort to blood, especially when it happens in the opening match on a TV show between two guys that no one gives a crap about, aside from the AEW diehards. We also had the predictable table bumps, once again in the opener. And of course, that's not even the stupidest part of the whole thing. So, they're doing stuff, and that's about as high of praise as I can give it. It's a garbage match. What do you want me to say about it? But at the point where Darby is winning over on Brody, what should happen but, egad, the lights go out. Guess someone forgot to pay the electric bill in Minneapolis, or whatever venue the show was live from. Or, it was just the House of Black doing their WWE Light Judgment Day shtick. So what happens is, Buddy Matthews and Malachi Black gang up on Darby in the ring while Brody is selling. Somewhere in here, Julia Hart got involved. And for the next several minutes, the match turns into a 3-on-1 handicap match where Malachi and Buddy are just helping Brody beat the shit out of Darby. No one comes out to help. No referees try to run down to get the heels out of there. There's no management coming out to enforce any rules here. They're just letting these guys beat up Darby. Which then begs a good question. Why did they wait until midway through the fucking match to do their hocus pocus bullshit and start beating up Darby? Why didn't they just do it from the opening bell and save Brody the trouble of getting his ass kicked for the first minute of the match? Apparently they didn't think that one through well enough. But there was one guy who was out there to make the save for Darby. And of course, who else would it be but Sting! Sting, who made the save by not coming out through the entrance tunnel or through the crowd, but making the save by, you guessed it, coming out of the coffin, which Buddy Matthews had opened the lid to. So in other words, Sting's idea to save Darby Allin from this brutal ass beating was to lie motionless in a coffin on the floor and patiently wait for somebody to come over to open the lid so that he could pop out and then go in to make the save for Darby. So in other words, Sting is a fucking dick friend to Darby. Of course, you had Tony Schiavone exposing the coffin gimmick when Taz asked how Sting got in the coffin to begin with, and Schiavone actually said, not making this up, must have been a trick door. Thanks, Tony. Burying the business into the ground, one step at a time. By the way, what would have happened if Buddy didn't open the coffin lid? Would Sting have just laid there the entire time and allowed Darby to get obliterated by three dudes that towered over him? What a douchebag that guy is. And it only got more stupid from there, because after Sting started laying waste to Buddy on the floor, we then got a series of angles that took place while the match is in progress. We had Sting and Malachi teasing a face-off in the ring. We had Sting tossing a bat to Malachi, only for Malachi to leave the ring voluntarily. We had Sting chasing after Malachi up on the ramp. And meanwhile, I keep asking, who the fuck is in this match? So I skipped ahead a few seconds, and the finish was Darby choking out Brody with a chain on the ring apron so that Brody could comically fall into the casket, the lid shut, and Darby won. This was abominable. And for the record, no. I do not have a vested interest in seeing a feud between Sting and Malachi Black in AEW. Then we had a Rush and Andrade El Idolo tornado tag, which was perfectly summarized during the entrances after Justin Roberts explained the rules. Tony Schiavone simply went, "Oh boy," which I laughed at. Just saying the quiet part out loud. He basically said everything but the obvious, well, this is gonna fucking suck. Personally, I don't know why they needed to deliberately book a tornado tag match wherein tags are not needed. What's so groundbreaking about that announcement? Every AEW tag match is a tornado tag match. When have tags ever been an issue in this company? And as soon as the Lucha Bros came out, I mean, that about gave me all the indication I needed to know that this is going to be nonsensical. So this was a hard pass for me. Good for me, though, because it saved me about 15 minutes of watch time. Following that, we had the Elite and the Job Order doing their Lifetime movie drama acting. It was Well, exactly what I said it would be after last week's Undisputed Era heel turn that made no sense. They all acted like middle school girls in the bathroom, gossiping over who was in what friend group. And I'm sure this appealed to the minority of guys out there that have never gotten laid in their entire life and actually enjoy all this melodramatic bullcrap. For me, it was vomit-inducing. There was a Jungle Book Christian segment that I kind of sort of half paid attention to. Luchasaurus beat a guy in about a minute. Jungle Boy was on commentary for that entire minute. Said absolutely nothing of value. Also, Christian could show up on the Jumbotron, do a very brief heat promo, and then Jungle Boy ran after him and got pulled away by security, and that was that. Oh yeah, and Luchasaurus laid out Pat Buck with a headbutt. I don't care. So then we had the Jay Lethal Sanjay Dutt Great Khali bootleg promo, which, got to admit, had its share of redeeming qualities in terms of comedy. One of those comedic moments coming right out of the gate when Sanjay Dutt asked if we all saw Battle of the Belts on Saturday, and there were maybe like 3 people in the crowd that reacted. The rest of them were sitting there going, fuck no, we didn't watch Battle of the Belts. Why would we? The hell was on that show that was worth our time watching? But things picked up when Wardlow came out, soon to be accompanied by FTR. Glad to see those guys still exist. You never would have known it with the fact that they completely disappeared from television after that fantastic match with the Briscoes a few weeks back. So, yeah, they're alive. And while I still wish that FTR would be doing something more constructive on this show instead of serving as backup in a Wardlow-Jay Lethal feud, hey, at least it gets them involved in something on this show. And they presumably will be working with competent talent. I mean, I'd be on board with seeing a Dax versus Lethal or a Cash versus Lethal match on TV. Why the hell not? I'll take whatever good I can get at this point on the show. Speaking of redeeming qualities, just want to throw this out there for the record. I think I'm starting to come around on Anna Jay. She's so ungodly horrendous in this heel role with the Jagoff Asshole Society. It is actually starting to surpass horrendous and become moderately entertaining by comparison. Her acting is hideous, but it's like laughable hideous. Her entire role on the show is to stand there in the frame, make a bunch of wacky faces while the boys are talking, and then choke somebody out off camera for no reason. Now, granted, it's hilarious how the announcers are talking about how Luchasaurus should receive repercussions for putting his hands on Pat Buck. Meanwhile, on the same show, Anna Jay's just attacking backstage hands on a whim. No one says anything. Apparently it's fine. By the way, on that subject, will Chris Jericho ever receive any fines or repercussions for, I don't know, say doing something dastardly like throwing fireballs in people's faces? I'm just asking. They had a Ricky Starks Aaron Solo match. It existed. I have no idea how Ricky Starks feuding with QT Marshall's faction is supposed to get me excited to see him and Powerhouse Hobbs face off on pay-per-view, but then again, I don't know why AEW does half the stuff they do in a given week. The match was whatever. I'm still a big Ricky Starks fan. Same goes with Hobbs, but yeah, this really didn't do a whole lot for me besides giving Ricky a win on TV. Oh yeah, and the Gunn Sons are still alive. Good to know. Especially seeing as how they got dumped off a stage in a dumpster last week and left for dead. Apparently they're fine though. No bruises, no cuts, no visible scarring. Remarkable recovery for those fine gentlemen. Then we had Madison Rayne making her Dynamite debut against Jade Cargill for the TBS Championship. So Madison has had apparently one match in AEW, which I believe she won on Rampage over the weekend. And all of a sudden, she is in line for a title shot after one match. You know what? I'm not even going to try to make sense out of it. Just move on. Bigger fish to fry, if you know what I mean. And once again, cutting the joking aside here, on the topic of Madison, I kind of have to go back to what I said last week when they announced that she was going to be more involved with the women on this show in terms of training. I've never had any gripes with Madison as a worker in the past. But is she really somebody that you would view as a go-to to enhance the quality of your girls division? Has she ever had any notable matches or promos or segments? The only thing I ever remember about Madison Rayne, going back to her work in TNA, was when she was a background player in a faction with Velvet Sky and Angelina Love, where their entire gimmick was rubbing their crotches on the ring ropes. Oh yeah, and their matches usually sucked. Just throwing it out there. Granted, she had a lot going against her, having to try and pry a good match at a greener than goose shit Jade Cargill. It was all right. Wasn't the worst women's match of all time or anything, but am I holding out hope that signing Madison to agent most of the girls segments is going to improve the division in any way? No. On the other hand, it looks as if they're setting up a Thunder Rosa Toni Storm title program, which I think could be good. I mean, I hate that it's babyface versus babyface. And so unless they turn Tony heel or something to make it interesting, the only thing we have right now is the expectation that the match will be good on paper. Needs a little more than that, but I could get down with the program if they build it up properly, which, 3 weeks, guys. Time's a ticking, So, I think that about covers everything with Dynamite this week, then. We covered the main event segment already, and, like I talked about earlier, man, CM Punk being back is going to add a real fresh coat of paint to this show. I'm excited to have him back, and while the thought of him and Moxley in a program doesn't exactly fill me with the tingles, it works as a short-term feud. They basically have their main event set in store for All Out, which, again, I think is happening in like 3 weeks. They've got a couple potential things that might be happening on the show that I can look forward to. Powerhouse Hobbs and Ricky Starks should be a good match, despite the completely arbitrary, contrived way they got there. Jungle Boy and Christian, I mean, as bad as they screwed that up already, the match itself is going to be a real make-or-break moment for Jungle Boy. I expect Christian to be on his game for that match, but Jungle Boy's needed something on this show for a long time now, and if the Christian feud doesn't get him over, all hope might be lost for that poor boy. Aside from that, though, that's about all I can think of off the top of my head, aside from the Moxley Punk match. The Trios tournament, I could not give a fuck less about. And quite frankly, that might just end up being one of those divisions where I either skip over anything involved with it, especially when you look at who's going to be associated with that whole thing. But on the other hand, maybe that's for the better. You want to isolate all the elite guys into their own little squad so they can do all their playground tomfoolery and let the grown men run the other half of the program. Dude, be my guest. The less I have to see of the Beta Bucks and Hangman Page and a job order, and hate to say it, but even the Undisputed Era at this point, If all those guys are just going to be off doing their own thing and be in their own little corner of the room in seclusion from everything else, fantastic. The ship has sailed on the Undisputed Era for me at this point. Hangman Page, all hope is lost for him. And you guys already know my thoughts about the Beta Bucks at this point. So we'll see where the show goes going forward. There's very little to get excited about, but the CM Punk thing, there is hope. Would you say that? Anyhow, I think we're ready to move on to the retro part of today's podcast. So this would be NWA World Championship Wrestling, August 9, 1986. And we open the show with footage of the Anderson brothers jumping the Rock and Roll Express at a house show. Well, could have been a house show. It also could have been an episode of Worldwide TV. In either case, Ricky ran them off with a chair while they were attacking Robert. And Robert had his ribs taped up here, so it was obviously a targeted injury. And this would actually play out into an angle that happened later in the show. So as we cut to the announce desk with Shivani and Crockett, the first words out of his mouth are welcoming us to the program by saying, and I quote, "We've got an exciting one for you because it's really something." And then Crockett immediately followed that with talking up the heavy heat between Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair by saying, again, this is almost a direct quote, "It is something going on between them." It sure is, David. Not one of his finer moments. Probably should have just been one of those deals where they say, you know what, let's do it again. And David, try to actually come up with something interesting this time to say. So then in walks Cornette, and I actually wrote down here, looking as douchey as humanly possible. He had on these ridiculous-looking sunglasses that he claimed he had received as a gift from Elton John in England. And while he's talking up Baby Doll and how the Midnight Express are going to be the World Tag Team Champions for a long time, I just can't take any of it seriously because of the glasses. But he eventually takes them off so he can call out Dusty, saying that he owes Bubba an apology for all he's done to him and Cornette. And it's funny because I was thinking, well, what did Dusty exactly do to either Bubba or Corny aside from smashing a gimmick chair over Bubba's head, which he knows sold anyway? And then it hit me, well, you know, there was that one time where him and Magnum tried to strap Corny to the back of a pickup truck by his neck and threaten first-degree murder on live national television. So, in hindsight, perhaps an apology wasn't such a bad idea. So, cutting to the ring, our opener was the Kansas Jayhawks versus Bill Mulkey and Pat Myers, or as David Crockett referred to them in this match, the Jayhawkers. And of course, the Jayhawks are Hangman Bobby Jaggers and Dirty Dutch Mantel, for those of you that didn't see last week's show where they made their first on-screen appearance. And during their interview, they laid out the challenge to the Midnights to go after the World Tag Team Championships. So Corny was out here to comment on that and do the Corny thing. Aside from getting heat on his boys by disparaging the Jayhawks at every turn, it's almost made better by him burying the jobbers. At least he knew who Bill Mulkey was. Poor old Pat Myers, I don't even think he got a recognition in this match. Not much to say about the actual match in terms of stuff. I don't remember a whole lot about Jaggers and Mantel as a team around this period, so a lot of this is fresher material for me going back and watching it. As far as I know, I don't think they stuck around Crockett Promotions for all that long, so this might have been one of those deals where they were explicitly brought in to feud with the Midnights, and that was about it. Following that, we had the Rock and Roll Express out with Tony. Major editing cut here, too, as Cornette completely disappeared into the ether, despite him standing at the booth just 10 seconds prior talking. But, yeah, they were mostly there to recap the Anderson situation. Best part of this is Robert Gibson starting off by trying to recap the angle and talking about Ole and Arn re-injuring his ribs. But, of course, it's Robert Gibson talking, so he's mumbling through the whole thing. You can't understand a goddamn word he's saying, what with all the people in the studio screaming. So, in order to fix this, there was one single audience member that begins shushing the crowd so we can hear what Gibson was saying. It didn't help. And then Ricky saved it by promising they'd become the next World Tag Team Champions after they were through with the Andersons. And of course, people all went crazy for that. Probably because they could audibly understand what Ricky was saying, whereas with Robert, it always sounds like he's gargling on a stack of marbles. Coming back from break, we had Magnum TA out to recap what's been going on in the Best of 7 with Nikita Koloff. Recently, they had their, I think Tony said it was their 6th match in the series, but it ended via double countout. So as of now, the record is still Nikita with 3 wins and Magnum with 2, which in a Best of 7, I'm not sure how that worked out when Magnum won the next round, because I know he ends up winning the series, but if it's 3-2 after match 6 because one ended with no winner, that would mean that they would have had to go another round. Elsewise, they'd be tied at 3 apiece by the end of match 7. Funny how I still had no idea how that series concluded, and it was one of the hottest programs in '86, especially for Magnum. The reason I remember it so vividly is because it was one of the last things he was involved with in terms of major programs before the career-ending accident. Anyway, he's doing his usual fiery promo on the Russians, talking about being the underdog and working from the bottom after falling short in the first 3 matches. But he always knew that once he could get it down to him and Nikita without Ivan and Khrushchev being involved, Magnum would get the job done, because he found out that Nikita can be beat. So that was all great. Made even better by the studio crowd cheering him on in the background. Really goes to show just how hot this dude was at this point in the business, and a few months out from now, all gone. So then Jimmy Valiant beat the shit out of Tony Zane, and whereas I usually mock and laugh at the fact that Jimmy Valiant's matches usually consist entirely of eye rakes, gouges, and every heel tactic in the book, now I can at least condone those actions. The man was humiliated during the Bash Tour, he was screwed over in a match that cost him his hair, and now he's out for revenge. So you know what? If I were in Valiant's situation, I'd probably have gone in there and done the exact same thing he did to that fat tub of goo, Tony Zane. Eye rakes and back rakes and biting, just totally not giving a fuck about being professional. I did laugh, though. You have Cornette taking Valiant to task for using all of these underhanded tactics, and when he goes to ask David Crockett whether or not he condones it, no hesitation from David, he simply goes, yes. So we will continue to see the development of the Paul Jones Army story as it continues post-Bash. You had the announcers saying that Valiant promised that if he couldn't shave Paul Jones bald by the end of '86, he would leave the promotion. So it's approaching crunch time for poor old handsome Jimmy. God, I still can't believe I'm actually excited to see this feud continue after all the trash talking we've been doing about it, but goddamn, man, that hair angle they did last week, or they showed last week from the Bash Tour, it was so tremendous. There's no way this thing can't continue at this point. Goes to the credit of just how great Jimmy Valiant was. So then we had quite the segment, actually. It begins with Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch coming out to do a promo, and he's talking about how while he was sitting on his farm in Canyon, Texas, He had a lot of people asking why he's just sitting around and watching all the heels run roughshod in Jim Crockett Promotions. And while there's a lot of great talents here putting up the good fight, it's a numbers game issue. So Murdoch got on the phone, gave Jim the call, and asked if he could come down to help out. There was a part in here where he mentioned the angle where the Andersons crippled Dusty in the cage and put him out of commission for a period. An angle that I believe dated back to late 85. So apparently it took Dick Murdoch until the summer of 86 to figure out, yeah, you know what? Maybe I ought to help a brother out. A little late to the party there, don't you think? And then the segment got strange. Because then Baby Doll interrupted and started talking about how Murdoch is going to watch her back in St. Louis when she's in her showdown with Cornette. She claims to know what hotel Cornette was staying at, which is very unsettling. Not sure how she would have obtained that information, or quite frankly, how that's even relevant. Unless she was planning on fucking him, which I don't think was an option on the table, considering their checkered past. And, well, then she kissed Murdoch on the cheek. Murdoch sold this by widening his eyes. And then Baby Doll linked arms with him, and they both walked off together. Presumably to maybe go fuck before they flew out to St. Louis later on. God, who was it on the show weeks back that joked about Baby Doll being loose? Might have actually been Cornette now that I think about it. I mean, in story, he's not wrong. Baby Doll was trying to get in everyone's pants on this show. I also like how the story is, Captain Redneck, you are going to watch my back tonight in St. Louis, and Murdoch's response to this is, well, I guess I am now. As if he had nothing else going on that night. Sure, I'll fly out to St. Louis and stand ringside while you beat up Cornette. Why not? It would be a jolly old time. Probably didn't come without a price, but still. So then the Warlord decimated George South in about a minute, and Baby Doll was also back out because she was managing the Warlord at this period. So I guess that session with her and Murdoch was more like a handjob quickie, because she was right back out here with the Warlord for this 15-second match. Cornette was also back so that he could scream and call Baby Doll a fat hog several times over. He also referred to Murdoch as closely resembling Gomer Pyle, which might have been the loudest belly laugh I've ever had in my entire life. No doubt in my mind I woke up some neighbors with how hard I laughed at that line. And of course, the only people that would know the Gomer reference are for the people that watch 1960s sitcoms. By the way, I love the finish to this match. George South tried to do a couple run rope spots, but he kept getting shoulder tackled. So at the end, South teases another rope run spot, but then he tries to outsmart Warlord by running straight at him. Warlord, no hesitation, scoops the guy up onto his shoulder, kills him with a power slam. Epic. So coming back, we had Shivani and Crockett running down the highlights of the Ric Flair-Dusty Rhodes title match from Kansas City. That's Kansas City, Kansas, by the way. I know there's a Kansas City, Missouri, so I should specify. And, well, they spent a good amount of time covering this, and they were really trying to play this whole thing up like a big deal, giving you the impression that there was this big angle that took place with Dusty and the Horsemen at this event. And, well, here's basically what happened. Tully and JJ showed up before the opening bell so that Tully could challenge Dusty for the world title. Then they cut to the finish of the match where Dusty pinned Flair with his foot under the bottom rope. And while JJ's bantering back and forth with the official, Tully runs in and gives Dusty a chair shot to the bad leg. And while Flair has him in the figure four, Tully gives Dusty a knee drop from the top rope. And they did talk about how Dusty's leg was in bad condition, talked about the whole backstory with the Horsemen trying to put Dusty out of commission for good. But with the way they covered this, you'd have thought this is like a career-ending injury or something. And after watching it play out on television, it's kind of just an ordinary injury angle with the heels attacking a limb with a weapon. And, maybe it's because I'm so numb to injury angles in wrestling anymore because they usually never lead to anything. And, the guy's right back on his feet perfectly fine 3 segments later. Don't get me wrong, I love this segment. And Dusty did a great fiery promo on Tully and the Horsemen during the pre-tape. It all falls into the playbook of Ole's promo where he vowed that by the end of 86, the Horsemen were going to rid Dusty from the NWA altogether. It was all prototypical wrestling booking 101, and when you know it, guys didn't have to leap off of 20-foot ladders and break their legs in half to get it over. Imagine that. We had Nikita Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev versus Randy Bryant and Bill Tabb. Typical Russian beatdown here. Pretty much nothing to say about the actual match. The best part of this entire thing was the spot where Bill Tabb tagged in for the first time, and he goes to do the standoff with Nikita, and the spot consists of Bill coming through the second rope, stoically looking at Nikita for all of 15 seconds, and then Nikita just kicked him in the gut, and the heel started kicking his ass. This was poor planning on Bill's part. He also took one of those wacky bumps off the Irish whip where instead of just taking the flat back bump after getting clotheslined, Tabb leapt high into the air and basically took a forward momentum back bump. It looked goofy. Nikita got the win with the sickle, though. But then came the highlight of the show. And this is exactly how it was written on screen. Paul Jones, and the subtitle underneath read, "And his army." And just to make the thing even more over the top, Cornette was conducting the interview. And we actually had the whole squad here, including good old Tijo Gijo, who I think might rank among the most useless of all wrestlers working in Crockett Promotions in the year 1986. Has this guy had more than 2 matches? Just asking. And of course, they're all having a good hearty laugh at the whole Jimmy Valiant situation, mocking the fact that he was wrestling in a bandana earlier on. It's made even better by the fact that Shaska Watley is there yucking it up and calling Valiant Onion Head, despite the fact that he was recently shaved bald on the Bash Tour himself. But because he's a heel, of course he's going to completely no-sell it. And while Paul Jones didn't have a whole lot in terms of notable material here, he did mention something that becomes very important for a later date. He says that he recently met with Manny Fernandez to offer him a spot in the Paul Jones Army, telling him to think about it and get back to him when he's ready to make an answer. And it made me remember, oh yeah, I totally forgot about the Manny Fernandez heel turn of 1986. Spoiler alert, I know, but, I mean, to be fair, did anyone even remember that the Ragin' Bull was even a thing on the show in the last 3 months? For the entire summer of 86, his segments have included random TV squash appearances and promo segments where he is completely outclassed by Handsome Jimmy, where he just stands in the background and serves as his right hand. So, well, stay posted for that, I guess. Oh, yeah, and Shaska Watley also screamed a bunch of incoherent verbiage here. I wrote nothing down about it, aside from laughing at Cornette and Jones playing with the gimmicked ponytail that they chopped off of Valiant's head weeks back. Then we had Dick Murdoch versus Vernon Deaton. Other than Murdoch winning with the Brainbuster, the only thing I noted here was Cornette taking grave offense to the fact that Dick Murdoch probably wears white socks. Because apparently this is how people used to label rednecks back in the day. Beer drinking, farm running, weed chewing, white sock wearing outlaws. didn't know people who wore white socks were considered outlaw. Following that, we had Corny interviewing Ric Flair. And remember last week when we had the casual sit-down with Flair and Shivani, and Flair was in super stern, super calm, cool, and collected mode, where he talked about how Dusty proved he was the better man because he beat the man, and there were no veins popping or blood vessels boiling at any point. Well, this promo was back to the normal Ric Flair we've all come to know and love. Only thing missing from it was the Flair flop and the elbow drop to cap it off. Talked about how the Kansas City match, where Tully and JJ ran in at the end, claims they were only there to draw the ref's attention to the bad call because we all clearly saw Flair's foot under the bottom rope. He says that life is made of two kinds of people, to which I thought he was going to say something to the effect of the two kinds of people being Ric Flair and everyone else. But no, he said leaders and followers. Says that in the world of professional wrestling, you have champions and contenders. And then he sort of went into crazed Ric Flair mode, where he was showing off his designer outfit, mentioning something about how you can't worry about the figure four because then you have to go to bed at night worrying about the belly-to-belly or the Russian sickle. And then he started talking about Deborah Shelton, Magic J, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and that was about the point where he totally lost me. And I just wrote down here in my notes, Rick's gonna Rick. We did get the patented jacket removal. So even though it wasn't full-fledged Flair mode circa WCW 1998, where, he's stripping down to his undergarments and handcuffing himself to the ring rope, this is definitely a good old-fashioned Ric Flair promo. And he did mention something about St. Louis, which I believe was the city where he won the belt back from Dusty. So that probably accounts for why they shot the angle with Dusty in Kansas City, just to give him an outing for dropping the strap back so quickly to Flair after winning it just 2 weeks prior. Good segment, though. Then we had Rocky King and Steve Regal. Steve Regal was also the junior heavyweight champion at this point. A belt that I not only forgot existed, but I also completely forgot who the champion was prior. It's a fun little TV match for the minute and a half it actually got. Kind of a bummer it was so short. I could have gone to see these guys go a few more minutes. But Regal won with the Russian leg sweep. It's really all there is to say about it. Then we cut back to the booth for a Russians promo. Speaking of Russian. And let me just say this from the jump. God bless Crusher Khrushchev. I always like Crusher. Nothing against the guy. He's a great athlete, good worker, hard-working dude. God, his promos fucking sucked. And, whereas with guys like Magnum TA, where if you actually go back and listen to his promo work from, Mid-South when he was really green and new to the business, you at least saw that level of progression with his promos over the next couple years. Khrushchev's promos, whether he was generic white meat babyface Barry Darso or the Russian sympathizer here in 86, those promos were so bland. And he never got any better on the stick no matter how hard he tried. I don't even know the best word to describe it because it wasn't like Paul Jones level train wreck where he stumbled over himself constantly. It would lose his train of thought midway through. He was just so vanilla. It's really on par with what we hear a lot of green guys in the business today in terms of promo delivery, where it just sounds phony. You can tell they don't really mean what they say. There's no bass or factor to any of it. It's just dry as fuck. It's basically the Khrushchev promos in a nutshell. Only difference is the guy actually had some body definition, so he at least looked intimidating. I have no idea what he said here. He was mostly spitballing a bunch of verbiage about the baby faces. I know he name-dropped the Jayhawks, Dick Murdoch, and Magnum TA. But then Nikita took over, And even though I usually barely understand most of what he says because of the broken English, I can confirm it was still 1,000 times better than Crusher's delivery. It says that Magnum can't afford any more mistakes in the best of 7. It says that Magnum has pride, but it won't be enough because Nikita will be new USA champion. And he even sent out a warning message to Dusty and Flair saying he's on his way to the World Championship. Well, give it about 4 months. Foreshadowing. Cutting back to the ring, we had the Midnights wrestling Darren Evans and Tom Pittman. And when I say the Midnights wrestled Evans and Pittman, it's more accurate to say that the Midnights did something resembling wrestling and somehow made it work. There was a moment in this match where Cornette not only outright buried these poor fuckers, but he outright said, and this is almost taken directly word for word, they probably went out and found these men in the streets because you would have to be semi-retarded to get in the ring and think you stand a chance with Dennis and Bobby under any circumstance. No. I mean, he's not entirely wrong. I'd maybe have chosen a different form of vocabulary for television, but, well, Cornette was kind of an unfiltered persona, if you know what I mean. So then we had Tully and JJ doing a promo. Once again, they are recapping the Flair Dusty angle from earlier on and making passive jokes about the conspiracy to attack Dusty with a chair, talking about the absurdity of them meeting before the show and plotting such a heinous attack. I mean, come on, it's not like they're heels, right? And JJ's going off about how Dusty is nothing more than a 30-day transitional champion, and there's a camaraderie amongst the Horsemen that is unparalleled in the wrestling sport, which accounts for why none of Dusty's friends came out to save him in Kansas City. True that. And this is so great with Tully here because, keep in mind, and I don't think we mentioned this yet, but there is sort of an inbuilt story with this whole thing. The story they played up with the Horseman angle was that the only reason that Tully and JJ were in Kansas City to begin with was so that they could go clothes shopping. Just classic heel stuff here. Like, we were all supposed to believe that Tully and JJ flew out to Kansas on the same night that Flair was wrestling Dusty for the world title. Also, they could go shopping at H&M. Fucking douchebags. I love it, though. It's so great. I love Tully here because after he's running down Dusty and poking fun at the fact that he didn't need to conspire to lay out Dusty with the chair because he's already beaten him before, and he knows he can do it again. He gets to the end, and he goes, "The reason I attacked you with a chair in Kansas City, Dusty Rhodes, I don't like you." Yep. That was Tully's rationale for jumping Dusty and Pillmanizing the leg. I'm a heel. Therefore, I don't like you. Huh. What a novel concept in pro wrestling. A bad guy attacks a good guy because the bad guy is an asshole prick that doesn't like the good guy. It's almost like there's this thing in wrestling called heels and baby faces where they feud with each other and the people cheer the good guy and boo the bad guy. You know, like they would pay money to go see that live. I mean, we may have seen it a time or two in the history of pro wrestling. I don't know, though. Don't ask me. I'm not a historian or anything. Then the Rock and Roll Express beat Pablo Crenshaw and Bob Burrows in about a minute. And I'll give you one guess as to what they won the match with. The more notable part of the segment was the Anderson run-in afterwards, where they tried to lay out Robert Gibson again by attacking the ribs. But before they could do any further damage, Arn Anderson came down from the second rope to try and do the double axe to Gibson, only for Morton to cut him off with a back elbow. So that sent the heels packing. More notably, though, Ricky was heavily favoring his hip in this segment. So I don't know if he landed wrong when he got dumped out to the floor or if he was just selling, but I noticed he was limping in the ring afterwards. And even Pee-wee went to whisper something to him before they cut away, probably asking if he's all right. Then we had a gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and Precious promo. Precious, who is now sporting a perm. And here's what I wrote down. Jim Garvin did about 8 minutes of promo material in about 30 seconds, spouting off a bunch of heat on Dusty Rhodes, saying he's after him in the World Championship. Talks about Dusty's horrible taste in women and how Baby Doll was out here sucking up to Captain Redneck earlier on. By the way, Garvin was also not happy that Murdoch was stealing his Brainbuster finish. But this is a great cap at the end here where Garvin says that he's after Dusty in the World Heavyweight Championship, and if Baby Doll gets in the way of anything, and he pauses so that Precious can speak into the microphone and say she's going to slap her face off. And right before they leave, she goes, "Was that all right, Jimmy?" And Jimmy goes, "That was fine, baby." Not sure if that was meant to be edited off or not, but made for a funny TV moment. And the last match was Buddy Landel in a squash with Randy Barber. Beat him in about a minute with the figure four. And then him and Bill Dundee did a very quick post-match promo where Dundee was calling out everyone on the roster to come try and pick a fight with them. It also struck me during this interview, I forgot how tiny Dundee was. Not like stature-wise, but height-wise. Was that guy any taller than 5'6"? Which I know, in today's business is pushing giant size, but in 1986, when you're surrounded by large men 6 feet plus in most cases, you definitely stand out when you're on the shorter side. Thank God he had personality, otherwise I don't even want to know what would happen to his career. Once again, Buddy Landel is really pushing for that program with Flair. He referred to him here as the bogus nature boy. We talked about this a little last week, how this is a program that they pushed for a long time on television, but never actually paid off. Like one of those what-if scenarios that never panned out with Flair and Landel entering a real top-shelf world title program. I don't know. Politics obviously got in the way of it, but it's a shame we never really got to see that unfold in any way. And then Cornette closed out things with cutting a promo on Dusty, giving him one final message to either apologize to Big Bubba or get in the ring to settle the score. A program that would bleed all the way into the year 1987, for those of you that don't know. So get ready for a lot of Bubba Dusty confrontations in the next 5 or 6 months, because you're going to be seeing a lot of promo exchanges back and forth between them. Well, not so much promo material in terms of Bubba, but promo exchanges between Cornette and Dusty. Overall, pretty good show, though. Obviously, this is all post-Bash Tour, so they're starting to kick things into the next gear going into the fall. The Starrcade build is sort of the next marquee event that they'll be pushing, and we will definitely be reviewing that show in late November. But, dude, even when you go back and see where they were in terms of plot development at this point, this is right after the 86 Bash Tour, and you can already see them planting the seeds for a lot of these upcoming Starrcade programs. You got the Rock and Roll Anderson Brothers feud. Jimmy Valiant is still out for revenge with the Paul Jones Army. Nikita's teasing his rapid push to the world title scene. Tully and Dusty are obviously revisiting their story past. Lots of fresh programs and new beginnings here post-Bash. And hey, imagine this. We are several months out from the actual event, and we can already see where they're going with all these different feuds. Now, like how things are built up nowadays on television, where the promoters realize, oh, fuck, we have a pay-per-view in 2 weeks, and we have one match announced for the card. Better start hot-shotting a bunch of bullshit last minute to try and fill a card up. This is back when they actually knew what they were doing and had a game plan about a year in advance. Shocking thing, too, it actually made for better television because things actually made sense. All right. So what do we got on the docket for World Class this week? Well, we had a double main event of sorts. In addition to the Iceman and Buddy Roberts hashing it out in a rematch, we also had Kerry Von Erich versus Michael Hayes for, I believe, their 83rd installment in the year 1983. But we open with a Mr. Ebony squash match. He wrestled Mike Reed. I think the only active person that was alive during this match was Bill Mercer, who was calling the ring action. The rest of the crowd, I think they were either sitting on their hands or they were asleep. They wrestled for about 3 minutes and Ebony won with the full Nelson. And right as soon as the match ended, they cut to a shot of two elderly ladies who were clapping and happily beaming with joy over seeing Ebony pick up this victory. Keep in mind, for those of you that have not been watching, Mr. Ebony was a heel. This is a very odd camera cut. There was also a classic Mercer line in here where he was talking about Mr. Ebony flexing his muscles. And one of his quotes, I'm not making this up, he goes, Mike Reed isn't flexing anything. He sort of relaxed on the floor. I guess this is what Mercer referred to when the job guys were getting their asses handed to them. Not selling or trying to make a valiant comeback or working from underneath. No, instead they are simply relaxing whenever somebody is putting the boots to them. The more you know. So that was a complete waste of 5 minutes. Then we came back for a Freebirds promo. Here we had Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts. And Mercer again, twisting that knife into the jugular of the Freebirds. He's under the impression that the Freebirds are on a bit of a tag team slump, considering they have not been winning matches as of late. Just one job after another. But Hayes assured us, on the contrary, they've never been better as a team. Says that they're the one team across the country that is often duplicated, never replicated. But this is all about sending a warning message to Fritz Von Erich and the rest of the family. If Fritz knows what's good for him, he'll make sure he doesn't let his sons get in the ring with the Freebirds next week. Elsewise, they're going to be beaten like they've never been beaten before. And after this blatant threat to the heels, essentially promising mass murder next week without explicitly saying it on camera, Bill Mercer's follow-up? Well, he turns to Buddy Roberts and goes, "So how's your hair?" Salty man. Love Bill Mercer. I didn't catch a whole lot of what Buddy said here, but there's a part mid-promo where he's ranting and raving about this, that, and the other thing. Meanwhile, the fans are showering him with Baldy chants in the background. So Buddy stops mid-promo to turn around and yell back, "I'm not bald." Classic heel stuff, man. What can I say? These guys knew how to do this shit right back in the day. We had Grand Marcus and the Mongol teaming up to face Gentleman Chris Adams and Jose Lothario. And as God is my witness, I'm not kidding. One of the first spots they did in this match was the leapfrog off of the rope spot with, of all people, Chris Adams and the Mongol. And you'll never believe this, Mongol didn't fuck it up. I peed myself. I was so happy. And then, of course, within seconds after that, Adams went for a pinfall attempt on Mongol, and when Marcus ran in to break it up, he did an inadvertent backsplash onto Mongol, which at the time I figured was a work. Looking back at it after the fact, I think he just fucked up. But They did the big four-way brawl early on, which eventually broke down into a regular tag match, to coin one of my favorite Alvarez statements. Just so you all think that I don't completely detest everything about the Wrestling Observer, I do actually like Brian Alvarez. He has some very good insight. Match was fine beyond that. The heels worked over Adams for the heat for a while, which was a strange choice, considering that meant Lothario had to make a fiery babyface comeback. It was definitely a comeback, although it lasted all of like 3 seconds before the heels cut him off again. One of my favorite spots in this match, I have no idea why they found this so funny. There is a moment where Grand Marcus has Adams in a chin lock, and he's sort of stretching his jaw and clawing at the inside of his mouth. So in order to break this up, Lothario runs into the ring, gives Marcus one chop across the chest, and then he just runs back out to the apron while the heels continue to beat down Adams. It was the most completely random thing you have ever seen in a pro wrestling match. But Adams had a nice little flurry of offense at the end. I love the arm drag takeover spot he did over the top rope at one point. I don't think I've ever seen that done before, and it looks so simple. But the match came down to the wire at the end. All four guys ended up getting in there for the brawl sequence, which led to a time limit draw. And after a Mongol dumped Lothario out to the floor, the heels tried to gang up on Adams, but that didn't last long before the faces ran them off. Good match. Then we had our Buddy Roberts Iceman King Parsons rematch. And with the pending story these two have going, the entire match was based around the Iceman trying to pull off Buddy's headgear. It actually had the most heat of anything on the entire show, because anytime the Iceman came close to ripping the wig off, the fans went apeshit for it. They didn't care about arm drags or 1,400 pointless dives or guys doing choreographed gymnastics for 20 plus minutes. All they wanted to see was a heel get humiliated and exposed on live camera. It's almost like wrestling was so much simpler back in the day and knew how to actually draw money. Match was back and forth with both guys, but the story was simple. Iceman would be in control for a while. He'd go for the headpiece. Buddy rolls out of the ring. Buddy would get some heat. Iceman would make a comeback, go for the headpiece again. Buddy escaped again. And they pretty much ran that cycle for the whole thing until the Iceman made his comeback. Buddy tried to cut him off, but the Iceman cradled him and got the pin. And Iceman gave it one last effort to rip that headgear off before Buddy managed to escape and run to the back. Although it was probably the most exposure we've seen with Buddy's bald head on camera up to this point. And you can tell, man, whenever they get to that payoff of finally exposing Buddy in front of the crowd in full, it's going to get a hell of a pop. So, for those of you out there that think I'm anti-long-term story because I shit on how bad a job AEW does at it, doesn't mean I'm against it entirely. I just point out the fact that AEW sucks at it, and Tony's vision of long-term storytelling is incomprehensible and makes no sense. This at least makes sense, and you're actually eager to see the payoff. Whereas, I've never cared about the Undisputed Era turning on the Beta Bucks because A, no one gives a shit, B, they've given me no reason to give a shit, and C, it made no sense in the first place. And then our second double main event feature, the never-before-seen Kerry Von Erich Michael Hayes showdown. That is never before seen in the last 2 weeks. Well, it was a Michael Hayes match, that's for sure. Kerry whipped him around for a while. Hayes stalled on the floor and made all his facials, did the minimal amount of work as humanly possible, and still had the people engaged throughout the whole thing. Obviously got the heat on Kerry so he could milk the big babyface comeback at the end. There was a passing mention in this match that gorgeous Jimmy Garvin defeated Kevin Von Erich to win the American Heavyweight title at some point in the last week. Just randomly letting us know that this title change occurred midway through a match and glossing over it in about 15 seconds. No big deal. Thanks, Bill. And the finish here, after all that heckling from Bill Mercer earlier on, after Hayes assured us last week that the next time it was one of the Freebirds in the ring with the Von Erichs, the Freebirds would come out on top. Well, the finish is Kerry rolling up Hayes with a schoolboy and pinning him. Now, it did come at the expense of a spot before, where Hayes tried to roll up Kerry and pin him with his feet in the ropes, but Bronco Lubick, he caught it, and he stopped the count. Good officiating. And after Hayes did the pre-celebration before the bell, that allowed for Kerry to take advantage and get the pin. And out of frustration with all this, Hayes gave Kerry the pile driver after the bell and laid him out, which then prompted all the poor fans that were crowding the ring for an autograph to be escorted back to their seats. Sorry, kids. Kerry just got his neck broken. No autograph signatures for you this evening. Maybe next time. And we close things out with Chris Adams coming over for a sit-down with Mercer at the desk. Covered a couple different talking points here. Said that he came to Dallas to fight the Mongol, and their feud isn't finished yet. So, in other words, expect more Mongol Adams TV matches, which, most of them haven't been that bad, so it's not a big deal. He also informed us that he does not approve of Michael Hayes giving someone a pile driver after a match is over. Noted. And he said that even though Kevin lost the American Heavyweight title and he's not happy about the way it was done, Adams has been vocal about his issues with Jimmy Garvin, so now he has a reason to chase Garvin and get his hands on the American Heavyweight title. And this is all delivered in such a way that gave you the impression that these two were just having a very casual conversation at Starbucks. But hey, I'm not complaining. I actually enjoy it when a wrestling show doesn't have people constantly screaming at me for the entirety of the program. Gives me less of a migraine when the show's over. Good program overall, though. Obviously, the big takeaway is them setting up the six-man tag title showdown between the Freebirds and the Von Erichs for next week. And Mercer did a fine job talking about the backstory during the main event and how it was David that sort of handed the Freebirds the belts in late 82, right before Hayes, Gordy, and Roberts, stabbed Kerry in the back in the cage. So that bad blood is still there amongst all parties. You got guys mingled in some other small programs in between. Chris Adams and Jimmy Garvin is taken off. We still got King Parsons trying to remove Buddy's headgear. We say it a lot, but it's a very simple wrestling program. And you know what? When you compare it to the Crash TV environment we get today where, there's constant shit happening left and right and you can't follow any of it, this is one of the aspects of the business that's gravely missed, especially with the territories. Like I said before, I'm easy to please when it comes to wrestling, but in order for that to happen, you gotta simplify things and be consistent with what you feature on TV. Obviously, you can't book everyone on the same show week after week, and I get that. Quite frankly, you should rotate your roster and spotlight different people in different programs. But you also need to be making sure that you're drawing attention to those programs every week. Whether it's in passing or in a promo or a video package, it doesn't matter. They don't all need to physically be on camera, but just catch people up to speed with things. Make sure that people know what's going on. Not assuming that everybody is going to be following your 538 storylines, most of which are taking place on social media or YouTube shows that a quarter of your current audience watches. I think we all know what company I'm talking about, but, it's not excluding other promotions. Trust me, I've ranted about NWA's ongoing problems as of late, and, there's plenty of there's plenty of things that Billy Corgan needs to take away from what I'm preaching right now. With WWE, Hunter's not Vince, that's for sure, but he's also not Bill Watts as a booker or promoter either. So it's something to be cognizant of as we start to see WWE reshaping and revamping a lot of what their television looks like in the weeks to come. Again, I know people are they really like to reminisce about the old NXT model. Everybody has nostalgia for that old developmental system. There was good stuff on it, but I think it's also a good reminder to let people know that, especially if you have a Peacock subscription, you have those libraries and archives to go back and watch some of those old NXT shows. Like I say, I like to binge watch them occasionally here and there, but those shows are not as good as people remember them being. At least I don't think they are. I don't think they hold up at all. Again, I get older, I get crustier, I kind of reshape how I think about the business in a lot of ways, but, Hunter's model of NXT was very simplistic, but it wasn't a perfect program either. So keep that in mind as we see how the main roster develops in the next year or so. Anyhow, I think I've done enough damage for this week. Now I just get to wait and see how many people get bent out of shape with me bitching and moaning about AEW this week. It's a weird cycle. Sometimes my AEW reviews get little recognition, and then somehow the YouTube algorithms make it so a significant handful of people end up stumbling across my AEW reviews. I don't get it. I don't really change my tags or titles all that much. It might be something I say in the video itself that triggers a reaction where enough traffic comes in. It's a good thing for me, though. I'm at the stage now where I don't care what people think about my opinion of how god-awful that television show is. People know it sucks, and the only ones that get butthurt about it are the same people that get pissed when I call the Beta Bucks and the whole Elite clan a bunch of soft, weak, testosterone-deficient dorks. Because those are the only kind of people that like that kind of shit. I can't think of a single person with whom I associate that would ever be into anything those geeks do on television. And, I don't care about their personal life or what they do off camera. If they're into video games and the whole streaming thing, whatever. If they're making income off of it, good for them. If it makes them happy, it's a fun hobby for them, more power to them. But as a fan, watching that wrestling show unfold on television, when I watch them act like 14-year-old prissy schoolgirls on a wrestling program, sitting there and arguing over not being friends anymore. It ain't for me, dog. Especially for someone like me that actually values traditional masculinity and hates all this feminized crap that men are taught how to think and act in today's world. The way those guys come across on camera gives me all those bad vibes. They're not real men because they don't act like real men or work like real men. You know what a real man does whenever a friend causes drama in his life? He tells that guy to go fuck off and he walks away and never looks back. In the land of the elite, they sit there and cry about it on TV like we're all supposed to feel sorry for any of these jagoffs. Now, grow up. Get a set of balls, walk away, quit whining about it. Bunch of pussies. Anyway, I'm done ranting. We'll be back on Monday for another episode, so make sure you come back to check the show out then. Peace out, everyone. Take care.